John Matthews had always lived a life grounded in skepticism. As a husband to Sarah and father to Ethan, his days were filled with the routine of small-town life in the Midwest, working at the local factory, sharing family dinners, and attending church on Sundays, though his heart was never truly in it. He had grown up hearing Bible stories, but they were just that to him, stories. Faith seemed irrelevant to someone like him, someone who believed in science and logic over anything spiritual. That all changed one cold winter evening when John's life took an unexpected turn. After a sudden heart attack, he found himself lying on an operating table, his life slipping away. But what happened next was far beyond anything he could have imagined. As he crossed into the other side, John experienced a near-death experience that would forever alter his understanding of life, faith, and eternity. During his encounter, Jesus revealed a truth that shook him to his core, a revelation about the mark of the beast that John had never heard before. This story of transformation, awakening, and spiritual revelation is one that will challenge everything you thought you knew. Be sure to subscribe, like this video, and comment where you're from as we take this journey together. Hey, so my name is John Matthews. I never believed in the supernatural. I wasn't the type of person to go chasing after religious experiences or even give much thought to what happens after we die. Life was simple. You work hard, take care of your family, and stick to what you know. That's how I lived, always grounded in reality. But everything changed the night I died. I didn't just fall asleep. I was pulled into something far greater than I ever could have imagined. It all started so suddenly. One minute, I was sitting in my living room, laughing with Sarah and Ethan over dinner, and the next, I felt an overwhelming pressure in my chest. I thought it was just heartburn at first, but it quickly turned into something much more intense. My vision blurred and the pain intensified. Before I knew it, I was on the floor, gasping for air. The next thing I remember is waking up, not in a hospital, not anywhere familiar. I was in a vast, empty space. There were no walls, no floor beneath me, just an infinite stretch of darkness, yet there was light too. It wasn't like anything on earth. It was more like an overwhelming presence of warmth, peace, and love. But also, it felt like something was being held back, like there was more I wasn't seeing. I could feel a power beyond anything I'd ever known, and it made me afraid. It wasn't fear of the dark, though. It was a fear of the unknown, something so much bigger than me. Then I saw him, Jesus. I can't describe it perfectly, because it wasn't like seeing a person, yet I knew it was him. His presence filled every corner of the space, radiating light and love, and yet there was a sense of judgment in his eyes. Not condemnation, but a deep knowing of everything I had ever done and thought. I had so many questions. Questions about life, about why I was there, and about what would happen next. I didn't know what to do with myself, but he spoke to me without words, as if his very being communicated directly to my heart. He told me that my time on earth wasn't finished, that I had a chance to change, but only if I was willing to accept the truth. I didn't know what that truth was. All I had ever known were my own beliefs, my own doubts. I had questioned everything about God, religion, the afterlife. And here I was, faced with someone who spoke with the authority of eternity. His eyes didn't accuse me. They were filled with sorrow, as though he knew what I had yet to understand. I felt both humbled and terrified. I wanted to ask him so many things, but the words didn't come. Instead, I felt this deep, gnawing realization. The things I had dismissed in life, the things I had called myths, were real. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a dream. I was standing on the edge of eternity. But as much as I wanted to ask questions, my mind was overwhelmed by one thought. How could I possibly fit into this bigger picture? How could I, a man who had lived a life of disbelief and sin, ever find a place in this story? And then Jesus shared something with me, a revelation that would forever change the way I viewed the world, faith, and even the future. It was about the mark of the beast. Before that moment, I had dismissed the idea as just a strange and outdated prophecy, something out of the Bible that had no real meaning for today's world. But what he showed me, what he revealed about it, shocked me to my core. The truth about the mark wasn't something I expected to hear, but in that moment I understood. I had been living in complete ignorance, and now I was faced with a truth I couldn't deny. I was desperate to get back to Sarah, to Ethan, to my life. But in that space, I realized that everything was about to change. Would I embrace this new truth, or would I turn my back on it like I had done so many times before? I didn't know how to answer, but I knew I had to find a way to understand. The moment I woke up, it was as if I had been thrust back into my body with a force that was almost painful. I gasped for air, heart pounding in my chest, and for a brief second, I thought I was still in that strange, endless space. But when I looked around, I saw the sterile lights of the hospital room. The familiar hum of machines brought me back to reality, and I realized I was alive. Sarah was there, her face pale and tear-streaked, holding my hand as if she could will me to wake up with the power of her love. Ethan was beside her, his eyes wide with worry. But my mind wasn't on them right away. It was on what had just happened, the truth that Jesus had shown me. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry, and the words didn't come out clearly. Sarah kept whispering my name, her voice full of relief and confusion, but my mind was swirling with everything I had just experienced. How could I explain this to them? How could I make sense of something that had completely shattered everything I thought I knew about life, faith, and God? In the days that followed, I found myself increasingly withdrawn. I was physically recovering, but emotionally and spiritually, I was in turmoil. Every time I tried to talk about my experience, I was met with confusion or concern. Sarah, God bless her, wanted to understand, but she couldn't grasp what had happened. She didn't understand the deep, life-altering revelation I had received. The truth about the mark of the beast, the way it tied into everything I had been living through, she couldn't see it. How could she? I had barely processed it myself. I remember sitting at the kitchen table one night, trying to explain to her what I had seen. "It wasn't just a dream, Sarah," I said, my voice shaking. "I know it sounds crazy, but I saw Jesus. He showed me something. He showed me the truth about the mark of the beast, something I never understood before." She looked at me with a mixture of concern and skepticism. "John, I know you've been through something intense, but the mark of the beast? Are you sure it's not just a hallucination? You've been so sick, maybe your mind was just playing tricks on you." I could see the doubt in her eyes, and it broke my heart. I wanted so badly for her to believe me, to understand what I had experienced. But how could I explain something so complex, so terrifying to someone who had never seen what I had seen? My words felt hollow, like I was speaking a language no one else could understand. I knew I had to find a way to share this truth, not just with Sarah, but with everyone. I had to talk to Pastor Michael. He was someone who had always been there for me, even when I didn't truly appreciate him. Maybe he could help me make sense of it all. When I finally sat down with him, I didn't know where to start. He had always been kind to me, though I never paid much attention to his teachings. But this time, it was different. I needed answers, and I hoped he could provide them. "Pastor," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "I've seen something I can't explain. I died, and Jesus showed me the truth about the mark of the beast." His eyes widened slightly, and I saw a flicker of concern, but he didn't interrupt me. He listened, truly listened, as I explained the vision I had received, the way I had seen the mark's true nature. It wasn't just a symbol, I told him. It was something much deeper, something tied to choices we make in this life. I explained how the mark was not only a sign of allegiance to the forces of evil, but also a reflection of the spiritual state of one's soul. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the world was moving closer to the moment when that choice would be forced upon us all. When I finished, Pastor Michael was silent for a long time. I could see him wrestling with what I had said, his mind turning over the implications of my words. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "John, I can't pretend to know exactly what you experienced, but I believe what you saw is important. The mark of the beast is not just some metaphor. It's real, and what you've described, it's a warning for us all." His words hit me like a thunderclap. I had expected skepticism, but instead I heard something that sounded like belief, something that gave me hope. Maybe I wasn't alone in this journey after all. But even as Pastor Michael acknowledged the truth of what I had seen, I couldn't shake the feeling that my journey was just beginning. This revelation was only the first step, and I had no idea where it would lead. The fear of losing everything, my family, my community, my identity, kept gnawing at me. How would I ever reconcile this new truth with the life I had built? It was a week after my conversation with Pastor Michael when the first major twist came. I was alone in my room, struggling to process everything I had learned, when it hit me. There was more to the revelation than I had initially understood. I had thought the mark of the beast was something distant, something in the far future, but I suddenly realized that it was already happening. The signs were there, hidden in plain sight, but I had been blind to them. I had always been the type of person to dismiss certain biblical prophecies as ancient myths, outdated and irrelevant to my life. But the more I thought about what Jesus had shown me, the more I started to see how close we were to the moment when those prophecies would unfold. It wasn't just about a physical mark that would be forced upon people in some distant future. No, it was already happening, through the way people were choosing to live their lives, the choices they were making every single day. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding as I realized what was unfolding around me. The systems of this world, consumerism, technology, the political powers, the social movements, were slowly but surely conditioning us to accept a new reality, one where the truth of God's word would be silenced. This wasn't just a physical mark, it was a spiritual one, and people were unknowingly aligning themselves with it every time they chose to reject truth and embrace the false promises of this world. That's when I understood. The mark of the beast wasn't just about one defining moment in the future. It was a gradual process, a choice we were being forced to make each day without even realizing it. We were all being conditioned to choose the wrong path, and I was terrified. How could I stand up against this? How could I, a man who had just started to believe, be the one to warn the world about something so massive, so far-reaching? The revelation felt too heavy for me to carry on my own. I knew I couldn't just keep this to myself. The fear and uncertainty started to cloud my thoughts, and I felt a sense of urgency rising within me. Time was running out, and the world didn't even realize what was happening. But even as the weight of this truth grew heavier, I also felt a sense of clarity. I could no longer deny it. I had been shown this truth for a reason. There was a mission ahead of me, a purpose in all this suffering and confusion. I had been chosen to speak out, to warn people of the danger they were unknowingly walking into. But how? How would I even begin to share this with my family, with my community? Would they listen, or would they dismiss me as crazy? The tension inside me grew as I realized that I had no choice but to confront this truth head-on, no matter the cost. But what would happen to me? Would this journey destroy everything I held dear? The days that followed felt like a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, and every time I tried to act normal, I was pulled back into the weight of the revelation. I found myself withdrawing further from Sarah and Ethan, not because I didn't love them, but because I felt like a stranger in my own home. How could I explain to them that everything we knew was at the brink of a major shift? How could I talk about something as mind-boggling as the mark of the beast when they hadn't seen what I had seen? Sarah was worried. I could tell by the way she kept asking if I was okay, her voice full of concern, but I didn't know how to explain it to her. She would never understand. Every time I tried to speak, the words felt inadequate. "John, you're scaring me," she said one evening as I sat staring out the window, lost in thought. "You've been so distant lately. I know you're struggling, but what is going on?" I wanted to tell her everything, about the vision, about the truth I had seen, about the future I feared for our family. But I couldn't. I knew how crazy it would sound. She'd think I'd lost my mind, or worse, that I was trying to push my beliefs onto her. And the last thing I wanted was to make her feel as if I was abandoning the life we had built together. I remember one night, after a long day of trying to put on a mask of normalcy, I broke down. I was sitting on the couch, my hands shaking as I held a Bible that I had pulled from the shelf. The words seemed so foreign to me now, but I kept reading. I didn't understand everything, but I felt like there were answers here, answers I needed. "Why is this happening to me?" I whispered aloud, though I didn't expect an answer. But I wasn't alone. I looked up, and there stood Pastor Michael in the doorway, his face kind yet full of concern. "John," he said quietly, stepping into the room, "I know this is hard for you, but you don't have to carry this burden by yourself." I hadn't even realized he had come over. I hadn't been able to talk to him in days, but here he was, standing in front of me, offering the support I so desperately needed. "I keep seeing it, Pastor," I said, my voice cracking. "The mark of the beast, it's everywhere. And it's happening right now. We're living in a world where people are being prepared for it without even realizing it. And I don't know what to do with this." Pastor Michael sat beside me, his presence calming, but his words weighed heavy. "You're not crazy, John. What you've seen is real, but you need to be patient. There's a time for speaking and a time for waiting. Right now, God is showing you something important, but you can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. You need to trust in His timing." His words were like a balm to my soul. I knew I wasn't alone, but I also understood that there was a greater purpose behind what I had seen, and I needed to trust that God would guide me through this process. But even as I clung to that hope, I couldn't shake the fear that everything was on the verge of unraveling. The world wasn't ready for the truth I had been shown. At the same time, I began to notice subtle changes in how my friends and family were reacting to me. Some of my old friends, the ones I'd spent years hanging out with at the bar or talking about nothing in particular, started pulling away. They didn't understand what was happening to me, and I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was getting too serious, too distant. A few even joked about me getting religion and laughed it off. I had always been the one to mock faith, to dismiss those who spoke about prophecy or the mark of the beast. Now I was the one they didn't know how to handle. But what struck me the most was the way Sarah began to retreat into herself. She didn't yell at me, didn't accuse me of anything, but I could see it in her eyes. She was afraid of losing me, afraid of what I was becoming. She didn't know how to support me, and that fear became a wall between us, making it harder for me to connect with her. I could feel the tension building, not just in my relationships, but in myself. I was torn between the truth I had been shown and the life I had always known. Every decision I made seemed to carry greater weight, and every choice felt like it could either pull me closer to God or further away from everything I loved. But one thing was certain: I couldn't turn back. The longer I tried to make sense of everything, the more I realized that the path ahead wouldn't just be difficult, it would be fraught with challenges. Not only was I wrestling with my own spiritual awakening, but I could see the growing divide between me and the people I cared about. It was becoming clear that embracing this truth was not only a personal journey, but it was beginning to affect everything around me. It started with small things, little moments that felt like cracks in my relationships. At first, it was my friends, a group of guys I'd known for years, who used to gather on weekends to drink beer and talk about nothing important, began to notice how different I had become. They didn't quite know how to handle it. One evening, while we were sitting around the fire pit, I caught one of them staring at me. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You don't hang out like you used to, man," Jake said, his tone more serious than usual. "You've been reading too much of that Bible stuff, huh?" I could feel the judgment in his words, but I tried to keep my calm. "It's not about the Bible, Jake. It's about understanding the world differently. I've seen things that make me question everything I thought I knew." He scoffed and took a drag from his cigarette, shaking his head. "Yeah, whatever. You've been a different person since you came back from the hospital. We miss the old you." His words stung, but they also made me realize something important. My old life, everything I had known, was slipping away, and I wasn't sure if it was possible to go back. The world I had once comfortably lived in no longer felt right. I was seeing it for what it was, a system designed to lead people away from the truth. But could I really call them out on it? Could I really push back against a lifetime of beliefs, friendships, and comfort? At home, Sarah continued to struggle with the changes in me. I could see the hurt in her eyes as I spent more time in prayer or reading scripture. She wanted the old John back, the one who was easy to talk to, the one who didn't speak in cryptic phrases about prophecy and revelation. One night, she sat me down, her voice shaky as she spoke the words I had been dreading. "John, I need you to stop. Stop talking about the mark of the beast, about all of this end-time stuff. It's scaring me. I can't follow you down this path, not like this." Her plea cut through me, but in a way, it only confirmed what I had feared. I was losing her. My spiritual awakening had become a wedge between us, and the more I tried to explain, the further she pulled away. How could I convince her when I barely understood it myself? But there was more happening than just my relationships. I started to feel the weight of the world shifting beneath my feet. Everywhere I looked, I saw signs of the coming change. In the media, in the way people spoke about unity and progress, in the acceptance of ideas that conflicted with everything I had come to know as true, there was an undeniable push toward something dark, something sinister. I remember the night I saw it most clearly. The news broadcast was running a segment about a new global initiative to standardize digital identification for every citizen. The idea was sold as a way to create more security, to reduce crime, to make our world safer. But the moment I saw it, I felt a chill run through me. This was it. This was the system, the one that would pave the way for the mark. People were being conditioned subtly to accept a global system of control. And it wasn't just happening in the far-off future, it was happening now. I had no choice but to pay attention to every detail. Every initiative, every new law or policy felt like another piece of the puzzle that was falling into place. And as I became more aware of this, I couldn't help but wonder, how long before it would reach a point where there would be no turning back? But even as I faced these growing challenges, I knew there was one thing I couldn't do: stay silent. God had shown me something too important to ignore, too urgent to let slip away. The journey ahead was uncertain and fraught with obstacles, but I knew I had to continue, no matter the cost. The tension between Sarah and me only grew with time. As I dove deeper into this newfound truth, trying to make sense of the things I had seen and heard, I found it harder to talk to her at all. Every conversation felt strained, every interaction tinged with an unspoken sadness. She had been my rock, the one person I had always turned to for comfort, but now it felt like we were on opposite sides of a vast chasm. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, she stood up, the frustration written all over her face. "I can't do this anymore, John." Her voice shook, but there was an unmistakable firmness behind it. "You've changed. I don't know who you are anymore." I wanted to speak, to explain everything I had learned, to tell her about the mark of the beast and how the world was spiraling towards something I couldn't ignore. But I knew that no matter how hard I tried, it would sound like madness to her. She wasn't ready to hear it. I wasn't ready to lose her, but I could feel it slipping away, just like everything else in my life. "Sarah," I began, my voice breaking, "I'm still me, but I've seen something. I can't pretend it's not true. The world is changing, and I don't know what's coming next. But I have to speak out. I can't just keep quiet." She shook her head, her face pale. "And what about me, John? What about us? All you talk about now is this apocalypse, and I don't know how to fit into that. I need you. I need the man I married." My heart ached, but there was something deep inside me that wouldn't let me back down. I had to warn her, even if it meant pushing her away. "I'm not asking you to follow me, Sarah. I just need you to understand that I can't turn away from this. It's bigger than us, than our marriage. It's bigger than me." She turned away, walking out of the room with a finality that crushed me. As I sat there alone with my thoughts, I felt the weight of my choices bearing down on me. I loved her, but I couldn't deny what I had been shown. The truth was more important than anything, even if it meant losing everything. In the days that followed, I threw myself deeper into research, reading everything I could find about the mark of the beast, about the prophecies, about the end times. I couldn't stop. The urgency gnawed at me, keeping me awake at night. I knew I had to warn others, but every time I tried to share what I had learned, I was met with confusion or outright rejection. Pastor Michael was the only person who seemed to understand, but even he seemed cautious, telling me that there was still time for me to grow spiritually before fully stepping into the role of a messenger. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't wait. The world didn't have time to wait, and neither did I. One day, while I was at the church praying, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan, one of my old friends. The message was simple. "Are you serious about this stuff? I don't know what you're talking about anymore." I stared at the message for a long time, the weight of it sinking in. Ethan had always been my closest friend, but now even he was questioning me. How could I keep going if the people I cared about didn't understand? I thought back to the words Pastor Michael had shared with me. God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Could I really trust that God would guide me through all this? Could I hold on to my faith when everything around me was crumbling? I didn't know the answer, but I knew I had no choice but to keep moving forward. The world may not understand me, but I couldn't let that stop me from speaking the truth that had been revealed to me. The stakes were too high. As I knelt there in prayer, I asked God to give me the strength to continue, even when the road ahead seemed impossibly hard. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't even have a clear path. But I knew one thing. I had to trust that He would lead me through this journey, no matter where it took me. The more I sought understanding, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. But with every new revelation, the weight on my shoulders grew heavier. It was one thing to witness the rise of the mark of the beast in the world, but it was another to feel it creeping into every aspect of my life. I could see it everywhere. The subtle shifts in society, the pressure for conformity, the growing push for a one-world system. It felt like the very air I breathed was charged with an impending storm, and I had no choice but to brace for impact. I couldn't ignore it anymore. This wasn't just about prophecies or vague warnings anymore. It was happening in real time, and I was living in the midst of it. Everywhere I turned, I saw the signs, the technological advancements that seemed to be preparing the world for a global identity system, the increasing acceptance of policies that chipped away at personal freedoms, the push for universal surveillance. Everything was aligning with the vision I had been shown during my NDE. I began to dig deeper into the connections between all of this and the mark of the beast. I studied the book of Revelation, watched countless documentaries, and read reports from experts who warned about the dangers of a cashless society, the rise of biometric identification, and the acceptance of technology that could control every aspect of our lives. The more I learned, the more I saw that the world was marching towards something catastrophic, and I couldn't stay silent. Then came the dream. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. I had been lying in bed, exhausted from the day's research, when I felt a sudden heaviness in the air. The room grew dark, and I could barely breathe. I tried to move, but my body felt paralyzed, as if some unseen force had a grip on me. And then I saw it, an image so vivid and terrifying that it felt like my soul was being torn apart. I was standing in a vast, open field, surrounded by millions of people. They were all staring at a massive screen, their eyes glazed over, transfixed by a figure who appeared on the screen. The figure was charismatic, promising peace and unity, but there was something unsettling about him. As he spoke, the crowd cheered, their voices merging into a unified roar. And then, without warning, I saw the symbol, an intricate mark on the forehead of every person in the crowd. It wasn't like anything I had seen before, but I knew what it was. It was the mark. I tried to scream to run, but I was frozen, unable to move. I watched as people willingly accepted the mark, and with it, they became a part of the system, controlled, conforming, and stripped of their humanity. It was as if their souls had been exchanged for the illusion of peace and safety. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. It took me a moment to realize where I was, but the terror from the dream lingered. What did it mean? Why had I been shown this? I sat there in the darkness, my mind racing. The dream wasn't just a nightmare, it was a warning. The mark wasn't just a theoretical concept or a vague prophecy, it was real. And it was already here, being prepared to take hold of the world. I could no longer deny it. I had to act, but the weight of it was suffocating. The question that lingered in my mind was this: how would I warn others without sounding like a madman? I couldn't even talk to Sarah anymore. She had shut down completely, refusing to listen to my warnings. She was afraid, and who could blame her? It was terrifying to think about the world that was unfolding before my eyes, but I couldn't let that stop me. There were people out there who needed to know, who needed to hear the truth. That's when I met Alex. He was a fellow believer I had encountered online after sharing some of my concerns about the rising global agenda. At first, I wasn't sure if I could trust him. He seemed to know things, to understand the urgency of the situation. But there was something about him that seemed off. Despite my reservations, we began to talk more, exchanging thoughts on the mark of the beast and the deeper meaning behind it all. Alex was different from anyone I had ever met. He wasn't just talking about end-time prophecy, he was living it. He had been researching the rise of the one-world system for years, and he spoke with an intensity and passion that made me realize I wasn't alone. We agreed that the time for inaction was over. But even as I worked with Alex, I started to question whether he was really who he said he was. Was he genuinely concerned about the truth, or was there something darker at play? He seemed to know too much, and sometimes I wondered if he was too eager to take things to the next level. Was I simply seeing things through a lens of paranoia, or was I on the edge of uncovering something even more sinister? As I continued my research and my work with Alex, the tension in my life escalated. More and more people seemed to be growing distant from me. Even Pastor Michael, though he had been supportive, began to look at me with a certain hesitation in his eyes. It was as if the more I spoke, the more people began to question my sanity, my motives. The world didn't want to hear the truth, and as I came to realize, the truth was becoming harder to bear. The clock was ticking, time was running out, the final pieces were falling into place. And soon, the choice would have to be made. Would I stand firm in the truth, or would I be swept up in the tide of a world that was too afraid to face the reality of what was coming? As my understanding of the coming dangers grew, I found myself walking a delicate tightrope between the people who had once been my closest allies and those who now regarded me with suspicion or fear. The more I shared what I had learned, the more isolated I became. I wasn't just warning people anymore. I was fighting to be heard, and the battle was starting to take a toll on me. Sarah remained distant, and our marriage seemed to be hanging by a thread. Every attempt to talk to her about the urgency of the situation only seemed to push her further away. She couldn't understand what had happened to the man she had married, the man who had once been calm, rational, and focused on the everyday concerns of life. Now I was obsessed with warnings about a global system that seemed so distant from the life we had once known. It was clear she was scared of what I was becoming, and I couldn't blame her. But what choice did I have? The things I had seen, the things I knew, left me no room for denial. One evening, after another long day of research, I received a call from Ethan. I hadn't spoken to him in weeks, and I wasn't sure what to expect. He was one of my oldest friends, but our conversations had grown increasingly strained since I started down this path. "John, I don't know if I can keep doing this," Ethan's voice crackled through the phone. "You've changed, man. I used to be able to talk to you about anything, but now it feels like you're in some different world. I get it, I really do. You've had this experience and you believe in it, but this whole mark of the beast thing, it's tearing us apart. I don't know who I'm talking to anymore." His words hit me hard. I had been so focused on the bigger picture, on the urgency of the message I was called to share, that I hadn't stopped to think about the toll it was taking on the people I loved. I had alienated my wife, my friends, and now Ethan, someone who had always been there for me. What had happened to the simple connections we once shared? "I'm still me, Ethan," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm still the same guy you've known for years. I can't ignore what's happening. It's bigger than me. It's bigger than all of us. I've seen it with my own eyes. The truth is out there, and I can't turn away from it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought he had hung up. But then I heard a sigh. "I don't know what to say, John. I don't know how to support you in this, but you're my friend, and I don't want to lose that." The conversation ended with no resolution, but it was a small spark of hope in the darkness. Maybe Ethan didn't understand, but maybe he wasn't fully rejecting me either. Maybe in time he would come to see the truth, just as I had. But even as I held on to that hope, I knew it wouldn't be easy. The more I tried to speak the truth, the more I risked losing everything. Then there was Pastor Michael. He had been a pillar of support throughout my spiritual journey, and though he had initially expressed his concern over the intensity of my warnings, he had always encouraged me to keep seeking the truth. But now I could see the change in him. He was distant, more guarded. I had sent him a detailed letter about my findings on the mark of the beast, urging him to prepare the church for what was coming. In response, he invited me for a private meeting at his office. "John," he began, looking at me with a mixture of concern and caution, "I've been praying about this. I see the urgency in your heart, but I want to remind you, this is a time for caution. You can't just tell people everything you know without understanding how they will react. The world is not ready for this." I was taken aback by his response. Pastor Michael had always been open to exploring new insights, but now it seemed like he was holding back. I had hoped that he would be the one to back me up, to help me warn others, but now it felt like he was pulling away. "I'm not saying I don't believe you, John," he continued, "but I think it's important that you balance your urgency with wisdom. People are not ready to hear what you're telling them. It could cause panic, it could cause division, and we have to remember that God's timing is perfect. We can't force his plan." I left his office that day feeling more isolated than ever. Even Pastor Michael, someone I had trusted to stand with me, was cautioning me to hold back. But the sense of urgency inside me only grew. I couldn't keep quiet, not when I knew what was coming. The mark of the beast wasn't just a theory, it was a reality that was already unfolding, and I couldn't let the world slip into it without warning them. In the midst of this, Alex became more of a constant presence in my life. Though I was still unsure about his true intentions, I couldn't deny that he was knowledgeable and had a deep understanding of the spiritual battle at hand. We spent hours talking about the coming global systems, about the ways in which technology was already paving the way for the mark. Our conversations grew more intense, and I started to feel like Alex and I were in this together, perhaps even the only ones who truly understood. But there was a part of me that couldn't fully trust him. As I spent more time with him, I began to question his motives. Was he simply a fellow believer, or was he someone who had his own agenda? Was he trying to guide me, or was he pushing me towards something darker? The connections in my life had never been more complicated. With each passing day, I felt more uncertain about the people I thought I could trust. As I moved forward, I knew that these relationships, especially the ones with Sarah, Ethan, and Pastor Michael, would shape the course of my journey. And yet, the more I sought the truth, the more I realized that it wasn't the people around me who would ultimately determine my path. It was God and his guidance alone. The tension in my life had reached its breaking point. The more I tried to warn others about the looming crisis, the mark of the beast, the global control system, the more I felt like I was being swallowed by the world's apathy and fear. My own family was falling apart, my closest friends were drifting away, and even the pastor who had once supported me now seemed to pull back. The sense of isolation weighed heavily on me, but the urgency of the message couldn't be ignored. One evening, after a particularly tense conversation with Sarah, I realized that I had reached a crossroads. It wasn't just the world around me that was changing. It was me. I had been so focused on warning others about the future, on fighting to spread the truth, that I had neglected the people closest to me. Sarah, my wife, was emotionally distant. She had stopped joining me for prayer. There was no more conversation about the spiritual matters we once shared. She couldn't understand my obsession, and I couldn't explain it in a way that made sense to her. In that moment, I felt a deep ache in my heart. I had been so focused on the coming storm that I had almost lost sight of the person standing beside me. I couldn't let her slip away too. But how could I fix this? How could I balance my warning of the coming apocalypse with being a loving husband? Could I still be the man she had married, the man who had walked beside her in faith? The weight of this conflict almost crushed me. It was a choice between two paths: continue with this mission that had consumed me, or pull back to restore my marriage. But the truth, the weight of what I had seen, wouldn't let me rest. Then came the fateful day when everything came to a head. It started as just another ordinary Sunday. but I had no idea how deeply it would change the course of my life. I had prepared a sermon of sorts for the church, outlining what I had been learning about the mark of the beast. I had been hoping, desperately hoping, that Pastor Michael would back me up, that he would use his platform to get the message out. But when I stepped into the church that morning, something was off. There was an unease in the air, something heavy that I couldn't shake. Pastor Michael's sermon that day was nothing like what I had expected. Instead of speaking about the urgency of our times or the need to prepare for what was coming, he spoke softly about peace, about not worrying about things we couldn't control. He didn't mention the mark. He didn't mention the signs of the times. He spoke about the importance of trust in God's timing, of living with hope despite the uncertainties ahead. The moment felt like a punch to my gut. My heart raced, and I felt my anger rising. I had poured my soul into this message, into this understanding, and here he was, acting like everything was fine. No urgency, no warning, just the status quo. It was as if all my fears, all the things I had seen, had no place in the world that Pastor Michael was describing. He was ignoring what was coming, and it felt like he was asking me to do the same. After the service, I approached him. My voice was shaking, but I couldn't stop myself. "Pastor Michael," I said, my words bursting out in frustration. "Why didn't you speak about it? Why didn't you warn the people about the mark? It's not just something in the future, it's happening now, it's happening everywhere, and you just—" "John, I've been praying about this," Pastor Michael interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "And I believe God is telling me to wait. You need to trust His timing. I know you're passionate, I know you believe deeply in what you've seen, but we cannot rush ahead without understanding the full picture. You're seeing a part of the truth, but there's more to it, more that we need to prepare for, and it will come in God's time." His words stung. I had believed he would be the one to stand with me, but now I saw that even he was unwilling to face the harsh reality of what was unfolding. He wasn't denying it, but he wasn't willing to act on it either. I felt utterly alone. "God's timing?" I repeated bitterly. "How many more people have to fall for the lies before we act? The system is already here. They're already trying to put the mark in place, and you're telling me to wait." "John, you're not seeing the bigger picture. You're letting fear cloud your judgment," Pastor Michael said quietly, shaking his head. "God's plan will unfold as it should. Trust Him." I wanted to scream, but I just turned and walked away. As I stepped out into the parking lot, I felt a surge of anger and frustration, but it was mixed with something deeper, something darker. Was this it? Was this the turning point? Was this where I would have to choose? Was it time to accept that I had to walk this path alone? That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the thoughts that churned in my mind. The moment with Pastor Michael had shattered something inside me. There was no turning back now. The world was heading toward a moment of crisis, and I knew what I had to do. There would be no more silence, no more waiting for others to catch up. I would have to stand firm, no matter the cost. It was time to make the choice. Would I remain silent and allow the world to march toward its doom? Or would I take a stand, even if it meant losing everything? The choice I had dreaded had finally come. My life was no longer a series of calm, predictable days filled with routine. I was no longer just the man I used to be, the one who had gone to church every Sunday and prayed over family dinners. Everything had shifted, and there was no way to go back. I could feel it in my bones, the weight of this decision that would change everything. As I lay awake that night, replaying the conversation with Pastor Michael over and over in my mind, I realized that this was no longer just about me. It was about the world. It was about my family, my friends, and my calling. But more than anything, it was about the truth I had witnessed and the responsibility I carried. I knew I couldn't let fear of rejection, alienation, or even persecution stop me from speaking out. The time had come for me to make a stand. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay. Sarah could see it in my eyes. She could feel the distance between us growing every day. I had become obsessed with warning the world about the coming system of control, the mark of the beast. And in doing so, I had alienated the people who mattered most. I had neglected her, my children, and even my own soul. Was I willing to sacrifice my family for this mission? Or could I find a way to balance my responsibility to God with my role as a husband and father? In the days that followed, I found myself confronting one person after another. I began with Sarah. I knew that if I didn't find a way to speak to her heart, I might lose her forever. I had to make her see that this was bigger than us, but that didn't mean I didn't want us to survive this together. "Sarah," I said one evening as we sat on the couch, the house quiet around us, "I know things have been difficult. I've been distant, and I haven't been the husband you deserve. But what I've seen, what I know, it's not just some passing obsession. I've been shown something that I can't ignore, and I can't let the world continue without warning people about it." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and frustration. "John, I'm scared. I can see that you're changing. I don't know who you are anymore, and I don't know how to live with this constant tension. You're obsessed with something that feels like a nightmare, and it's consuming you." "I'm not crazy, Sarah," I said, my voice breaking. "I've seen the truth. This mark, this global system, it's already starting. It's not some theory. It's happening now. And if I don't warn people, if I don't stand up for what's right, then I'm failing everyone, including you." She reached out to take my hand, her voice soft but filled with emotion. "I don't understand it, John. I don't know how to walk this path with you, but I don't want to lose you. Please, tell me there's a way we can make this work." Her words struck me deeply. I had feared that I would lose her forever, but now I saw that there was a glimmer of hope. Maybe she couldn't fully understand the truth I had seen, but she wanted to stay by my side. She wanted to fight for us, for our family, and that, in that moment, was all I needed. But the battle wasn't over. Sarah's fear wasn't the only obstacle in my way. As I continued to press forward, I found myself confronting even more difficult choices. The warnings I had shared with my friends had caused a rift between us. Ethan, once my closest confidant, had stopped returning my calls. He no longer wanted to talk about the things I had shared. And though I understood his fear, I couldn't help but feel betrayed. Was this the price of truth? Was this the price of standing up for what I knew was right? Then, one evening, I received a letter from Pastor Michael. It was brief, but it cut to the core. "John, I've been praying about this, and I believe you need to take a step back. You're pushing people away with your obsession over these events. I know you believe in what you've seen, but you need to be careful. The way you're presenting this could cause harm. We need to proceed with caution." The words stung like a slap to the face. I had hoped that Pastor Michael would be my ally, but his letter was a final push into the cold. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. I had to choose. Either I would continue to speak out, knowing that it might cost me everything, or I would retreat and live in fear of the truth that I could no longer deny. As I sat in my room that night, holding the letter in my hands, the truth became clear. My path was no longer about avoiding conflict. It was about embracing the struggle, no matter how much it hurt. I had been given a message, and I couldn't remain silent. The world needed to hear it. The days following Pastor Michael's letter were some of the hardest of my life. His words echoed in my mind like a warning, urging me to retreat, to step back into the shadows of comfort and silence. Yet I could no longer live in that silence. The truth I had witnessed was too loud, too urgent. The world around me was changing, and I was being asked to choose whether I would remain a passive observer or be an active participant in God's plan. I couldn't pretend I didn't know what was coming. The reality of the mark of the beast, the system of control, was not a distant fear. It was already in motion, and I had a responsibility to speak out. But as I prepared for the next steps, I couldn't escape the mounting pressure. It was as if the entire world was against me. My family, my friends, even my church had distanced themselves from me. There were nights when I lay awake, wondering if I had made the right choice, questioning whether I had let my fears dictate my actions. The burden of being misunderstood, of being labeled as crazy, was almost too much to bear. My isolation felt complete. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table with Sarah, the conversation took a sharp turn. She had been quiet for days, her anxiety palpable. I could feel the weight of her unspoken fears pressing down on her, and it broke my heart. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, John," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "I see you slipping away from me, from our family. This obsession with the mark, with everything that's coming, it's tearing us apart. And I can't help but wonder if you're pushing us towards something that's going to destroy everything we've built. Her words hit me like a wave, drowning me in guilt. I had been so consumed by the urgency of the message that I had failed to consider the emotional cost. I had been so focused on the world's impending doom that I hadn't noticed the quiet devastation growing within my own home. In my pursuit of the truth, I had become blind to the very people I was trying to protect. "I never wanted this, Sarah," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I didn't ask for this to consume me. I didn't ask for this mission, but I can't ignore what I've seen. The mark, the global system, it's real, it's happening, and if I don't warn people, if I don't stand up for what I believe in, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But I'm not trying to push you away. I want us to fight through this together." Her eyes welled with tears, and she reached out to take my hand. "Then show me that you're still here with me. Show me that this doesn't have to destroy us." In that moment, I realized the truth of her words. I couldn't keep going on this path without considering the people I loved most. I had to find a way to balance my mission with the people who were standing by my side. I couldn't let the message of the mark of the beast destroy the very things I was trying to protect. But how? As I sat in the silence of that moment, the answer began to form in my heart. I didn't have to choose between my mission and my family. I didn't have to let one destroy the other. I could share the truth, I could speak out, but I could also do it in a way that brought people along with me, without isolating them, without pushing them away. But it wasn't going to be easy. The world was not ready to hear what I had to say. The resistance, both external and internal, was immense. People wanted to remain in their comfortable, ignorant lives, unwilling to face the reality that was knocking at the door. But if I truly believed what I had seen, if I truly believed in the message I had been given, I had no choice but to continue. This was my path. And then came the final turning point. It wasn't a dramatic event or a grand gesture. It was a quiet moment, standing in my living room, surrounded by the mess of my life, my relationships fractured, my faith tested, my family on the edge of collapse. And in that stillness, I knew with absolute certainty that this journey had a purpose far beyond anything I had ever imagined. It wasn't just about surviving the coming storm. It was about finding the truth that would guide me through it. I made the decision then and there. I would stand firm, even if it meant standing alone. I would continue to speak the truth, but I would do so with love and compassion, not anger or fear. I would find a way to make the message clear without losing my family, my friends, or my faith. I would not let this mission consume me in a way that destroyed everything I held dear. This was my moment of clarity. I knew what I had to do. The storm that had been building for months finally broke. It wasn't a loud, dramatic event. No, it was more like a quiet, inevitable collapse of everything I had known. It felt like the world was closing in around me, pressing in on all sides, demanding a decision I couldn't avoid any longer. The turning point came one Sunday, after church. Pastor Michael had invited me to meet with him privately to discuss what was happening in my life. I thought it would be a moment of understanding, an opportunity to reconcile the divide between us. But as soon as I stepped into his office, I knew that things were about to escalate beyond repair. "John," Pastor Michael began, his tone somber but firm, "you've crossed a line. The things you're saying, the way you're approaching this mark of the beast, it's dividing the church. It's causing panic among your friends and family. We cannot allow this to go on." I felt my heart race. I had anticipated some form of pushback, but not this level of accusation. I had been hoping for a moment of grace, but instead, it felt like the walls of my faith were crumbling, leaving me exposed. "I can't stop, Pastor," I said, my voice shaking with the weight of my conviction. "I can't sit by and do nothing while the world is heading towards something so catastrophic. I've seen it, Pastor. I've seen what's coming. The mark is real, and it's already starting to take shape. People are asleep, and I cannot let them remain in the dark." Pastor Michael stared at me, his eyes filled with concern, but there was also something else, disappointment. "John, you're not thinking clearly. The world is not as you're seeing it. You're allowing fear to take over, and it's clouding your judgment." I felt a surge of frustration rise within me. How could he not understand? I wasn't speaking from fear. I was speaking from truth. The truth I had been shown during my near-death experience, the truth that had completely reshaped my life. But I could see in his eyes that no matter how much I tried to explain, he wasn't ready to hear me. He wasn't ready to acknowledge the truth I had discovered. "I'm not the one who's afraid," I said, my voice now steady, though every word felt like it was coming from deep within my soul. "You're afraid to face what's coming. You're afraid to see that things are not as we've been taught. I wish I could make you see what I saw, but I can't force you. But I won't be silent anymore. I can't." Pastor Michael's face hardened. "Then you've made your choice, John. I'll pray for you, but this church cannot support your message. You are on your own now." The words hit me harder than I could have imagined. I had given so much of myself to this community, to this church, and now I was being cast aside. But in that moment, something inside me shifted. The pain of rejection was real, but it didn't break me. It only reinforced the conviction I had in my heart. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I had just lost everything. My church, my friends, and even the security I had once found in my faith. It was all slipping away. But I knew that there was no turning back now. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I couldn't ignore the truth any longer. As I drove home, the weight of everything settled on me. Sarah's face, full of worry and fear, flashed in my mind. My children, who deserved to live in peace, not in fear. I had been so caught up in my mission that I had neglected them. In that moment, I knew I had to find a way to reconcile everything. The mission I felt called to, my family, and my faith. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, staring at the house that had once been my sanctuary. It wasn't just a house, it was my family's home, and I couldn't risk losing them. Not over this. I couldn't. Inside, Sarah was waiting for me. The moment I walked through the door, she looked up at me with concern. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice trembling. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it hard to speak. But I knew I had to tell her the truth. "I've been kicked out of the church," I said quietly. "They can't support what I'm doing, and they want me to stop." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Oh, John, what now? What are we going to do?" I walked over to her and took her hands in mine. "I don't know, Sarah. I don't know what the future holds. But I do know that I can't go back to the way things were. The truth is out there, and it has to be shared. But I want to share it with you, with our family. I want to make sure we face whatever comes together." She nodded, and for the first time in what felt like forever, we sat in silence, holding each other. In that moment, I understood something that I had been missing all along. It wasn't about fighting the world or pushing people away. It was about standing firm in the truth, but also standing together, family, faith, and love. The road ahead was uncertain, and the challenges were still waiting, but I no longer felt alone. I had chosen my path, and I knew it was the right one, no matter what the cost. As the dust began to settle, I found myself looking back at the journey I had just endured, the internal battles, the external struggles, the loneliness, and the rejection. But amid all the turmoil, something incredible happened. I began to see things more clearly than I ever had before. The near-death experience, the visions of the mark of the beast, the profound truths that had been revealed to me, they weren't just warnings of doom. They were guiding lights, showing me the way to a deeper, more authentic relationship with God. I had been lost, wandering in the darkness of my own understanding, but now I was beginning to see the path clearly. That night, as I sat quietly with Sarah and our children, I realized that the ultimate lesson of this journey was not about the mark of the beast or the terrifying future ahead. It was about understanding the grace and love of Jesus Christ. Through everything, the rejection, the fear, the loss, I had learned that His love was unshakable, His truth undeniable. No matter what the world threw at me, I knew that His hand was always there to guide me, and that gave me peace. The story that I'm sharing with you today is not just about my own spiritual awakening. It's a story about the power of transformation, the ability to stand firm in your faith, even when the world tries to tear you down. It's about discovering the deep, unshakable truth that comes from knowing Jesus Christ as your Savior. Yes, I saw the mark of the beast. Yes, I faced rejection and isolation. But above all, I encountered the incredible grace of God in the midst of my trials. That's what kept me going. And now, as I reflect on everything that has happened, I feel a deep sense of peace, peace that can only come from a life aligned with God's will. I've learned that it's not about fighting against the forces of darkness. It's about being anchored in the light of Christ. It's about sharing that light with others, helping them to find the truth and the peace that I've found. The truth that no matter how chaotic the world may seem, God's plan will always prevail. As you watch this video and hear my story, I want to challenge you. What are the beliefs you hold on to? What truths are you clinging to that may be causing fear, division, or uncertainty in your life? Have you truly considered what it means to follow Christ with everything you have, without fear, without hesitation? It's easy to get lost in the noise of the world, to be afraid of what's coming, but I can tell you this: Jesus Christ is the answer. He is the way, the truth, and the life, and He will guide you through whatever storm you face. I invite you to reflect on your own journey and the choices you are making today. Are you ready to stand firm in your faith, no matter what it costs? Are you ready to embrace the truth, even when it seems like everything is falling apart? If this story has resonated with you, if you feel a stirring in your heart to explore this deeper, I encourage you to take that next step. Don't wait. Jesus is calling you, just as He called me. Take a moment to pause and think about where you are in your own journey. If you haven't already, I encourage you to give your life to Christ. There's no better time than now. And finally, if you found hope, encouragement, or truth in this video, I invite you to subscribe, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and leave a comment sharing your own journey. Your story matters, and it can be the catalyst for someone else's awakening.